Hello everyone, we are back again with another This Is How You Don't review. This time we're going to look at our buddy Phil's review of Dead Space Remake, or Dead Space 2023. Full disclosure, I have not played this game, I have watched a lot of it, and I have watched also quite a bit of the game that he's going to be comparing this to, which is the Callisto Protocol. And Callisto is bad. Straight up, I want to say that at the top of the video. Callisto Protocol is a bad game. It is very, very monotonous. It is very, very tedious, especially towards the end. Just from everything that I've seen of it, it just does not look like it is a fun game to play. By comparison, Dead Space looks like an absolute joy. But those are just my thoughts on it. Let's hear what our buddy Phil has to say about the games.
Hello everyone, I'm Darkside Phil, and just moments ago, I completed my standard difficulty run of the Dead Space remake that just released here in 2023. Ever since the game was announced, people ask me what are my thoughts about it. Do you think that it's going to be as original or different as, say, the Final Fantasy VII or Resident Evil 2 remakes? Will I play it? And ultimately, a big issue of contention that came up around my viewer base and just on the internet in general was that the original makers of Dead Space, that's Visceral Games, the studio that made this game back in 2008, actually no longer work for EA. They're their own standalone studio now, and that they just recently, in December 2022, released their own survival horror game, the Callisto Protocol.
This is patently false. Glenn Schofield, the co-creator of Dead Space, of the entire franchise, went on to work for the new studio that is behind was behind the Callisto Protocol. I forget what the name of the studio is actually supposed to be. I will look it up in a second. It is Striking Distance Studios. Striking Distance Studios was the company that is behind Callisto Protocol. Only Glenn had managed to go over from Visceral after they had folded and start working for Striking Distance. The other staff went on to do other things, like most staff does. Some of them probably stayed with EA and other departments. You never know. But either way, it was only one guy. And that's probably what he got wrong in the marketing, because he fell for the marketing from the creator of Dead Space, which was not the whole studio. It was just one co-creator of the franchise started working with the new team to make Callisto. Not the whole development staff. Just one guy.
And everyone's wondering, what's better, Callisto Protocol or the Dead Space remake?
It's Dead Space.
Why, if you have a choice? And
Dead Space.
Is the Dead Space remake worth $70?
Yes.
The purpose of this video is to give you my honest thoughts about the situation. Now, to do that, I need to give you some perspective. 2008, I'm just becoming a YouTuber. It's a hobby for me. It's not a job. I'm just messing around with random games. And the first horror game I ever chose to make videos of on YouTube was the original Dead Space. The game blew me away. It was scary as heck. It had a lot of graphical things.
This is such a weird flex that he's been around since the original Dead Space was around, and that he played the original, which is like a lot of people play the original Dead Space. It's just whatever. Nobody cares.
I became a huge fan of the Dead Space series, replaying the game several times.
When? Fucking when? When did you replay the game several times? He never did. He only replayed maybe once or twice for his other channels to get money from them. Other than that, he doesn't replay anything. And he only played Dead Space 2. Technically, he only played it once. He did a demo, a playthrough of it on Blip, which got him banned off of Blip. We're not going to get into the whole Isaac Himmler thing. And I said, in other places, that it just is a nonsensical joke that made, that really didn't do anything except make him look really, really bad. That's all it did. It just made him look really, really bad. And there was no real purpose to him making a bunch of jokes like that. And even then, they weren't that funny either, so.
Then playing its sequel, Dead Space 2 and Dead Space 3 as playthroughs live on YouTube, and also when I used to live stream on Twitch. So I have a lot of history with the Dead Space franchise. I actually replayed Dead Space a second time in 2013 for my audience.
I have a lot of history with Dead Space. The last time I played it was 10 goddamn years ago. That's not history, Dave. That's literally just, oh, I played it 10 years ago. That's like I saying I have a history with, like, you know, Dishonored or whatever. Like, no, I played the most recent one once. It's one of my favorite franchises of all time, but I haven't really replayed the first game in a while because I haven't had a reason to do so. That's fine to do, but don't say, oh, I have a history with the game. You never speedran the game. You never did multiple playthroughs of the game on higher difficulties beyond normal most of the time because you got to do things as quote unquote the developers intended, when really the developers intended for games to be played by stupid people like you, which is why normal difficulty is so goddamn easy most of the time. You don't have a history with this franchise. You really don't. Someone like Gerard the Completionist has a history with the franchise because he's played all of them multiple times for his channel with friends and has like so much merchandise from like the games and stuff like that, and has had a working relationship with Visceral Games when they were still around. You, my friend, do not have a history with this franchise.
And that was my latest playthrough of the game. I did go back and replay Dead Space 2 recently, a couple years ago as well. And so, the build-up and the hype began for the Dead Space remake, and as we started seeing all this stuff about it, I was kind of skeptical.
By the way, this goes on for several minutes. Like, he doesn't actually start getting into like the proper review of the game until like 6 to 7 minutes in. So we're gonna be sitting here the entire time. I don't want to fuck up my OBS.
Make it justify that price tag. Are they going to innovate with the gunplay? Are they going to add new parts of the game that weren't in the original? Will this game be worth a full purchase?
See, this entire sort of monologue would be better if it was part of an edited video with, you know, like title cards, gameplay in the background, and like, you know, actual fucking effort. Oh, that was a limb, by the way. I like pointing this out. Like, you can tell, like, even when he's going on these fucking rants, when he bans somebody, just from his body language. Like, he'll, like, again, most people will be able to tell decently enough. Like, he's watching his chat like a hawk for whatever goddamn reason. Despite the fact that this is not a video for his chat, he is not actively engaging with them. He's just talking at them the entire time that he's doing this review. But he still has time to look over at them, see when somebody says something that is slightly critical of him or that damages his ego just a little bit, and then he fucking bans them. Like, even with the little hand flourish, it's like the whole, like, he just has to be like, I guess he has a flair for the dramatic for when he decides to remove somebody from his chat. Like, you saw like what he just did. That was like a little bit of a hand flourish when he just kicked somebody out of his chat. Like, they are gone. I banished these. Like, fucking Christ, dude. Like, you don't even have to acknowledge what they're doing, and you don't have to acknowledge them at all if you made this a separate recording after you were done streaming, which some people have pointed out. Why don't you just record this later? You don't have to record this while you're streaming. Are you going to talk with us? This is not interactive streaming. This is not interactive streaming. This is just you, like, on like a soapbox, essentially. Even if you're not actually soapboxing, you're on a soapbox right now.
2 months ago, I played Callisto Protocol as a brand new release. And when I played it, I was honest. I basically was someone who wanted to give it a fair shake. For some really weird reason that I don't understand, it seems like the games media, as well as many content creators on the internet, crapped all over the Callisto Protocol. And I don't really understand why.
The reason why they crapped all over the Callisto Protocol is because it was a bad game. It was a really bad game. That's why. There's no other great reason for why the game was, like, why people did not like the game. It was just bad. Like, for like a fair assessment of the Callisto Protocol, you can watch like Angry Joe and his team talk about it, because they actually all played it together as like one big playthrough on the hardest difficulty. And Gerard completed the game as well, so you can look for his take on it as well. But they basically had the same opinion, that the combat of the game was very, very rudimentary. There wasn't much to it. And essentially, I think Gerard pointed this out, it's just Punch Out for like 10 hours. There's some enemies which try to make things a bit different, but it essentially is just Punch Out for 10 hours, which is fine because Punch Out's a good game, but it's boring when you're expecting more from Callisto. And Callisto Protocol has been regarded as one of the biggest disappointments of last year. Not necessarily a bad game, it's fine. Most people say like it's okay. But it is very, very disappointing when it has the pedigree of one of the creators of Dead Space working on it to be like, in terms of spectacle, in terms of its atmosphere, Callisto Protocol is very, very good at creating that. But for everything else regarding the Callisto Protocol, like especially with combat, it falls flat. There's like nothing to it. If you want a better survival horror experience from last year, play Signalis. I'll also say that Signalis is better. So it's actually really, really good. But yeah, Callisto Protocol is just not good, which is why a lot of people did not like it. And then most of them, they played on a higher difficulty level than just normal.
Now, the Callisto Protocol, again, actually the spiritual successor to the original Dead Space, made by a lot of the dev team of the original Dead Space game, feels different. Does it have a lot of similarities when it comes to an immersive UI, so that way you don't see health meter, ammo meter? Yes, very similar to Dead Space. Does it have a lot of similar? Oh, you put on the suit, right? Oh, it's the suit, just like Isaac's. There's people mutating into monsters, just like Dead Space. A lot of those things are similar, but I feel like that dev studio had the right to do that because they made the original game. Now, they don't own the rights to Dead Space, but if they were going to make their own game that they felt would be the spiritual successor, they had the right to take those ideas that originally they had come up with.
That doesn't mean it was a good idea. That doesn't mean it's a good idea to do that kind of thing. Like, I don't see Kojima trying to rehash ideas from Metal Gear into Death Stranding.
I didn't feel like I was playing Dead Space again. In fact, a lot of the things in that game were very
I mean, Iga did rehash ideas, but still.
The gunplay is weak. You can't really play it like a third-person shooter. You have to be constantly learning how to dodge and do melee combos and attacks to critically hit opponents and get them away from you. And in addition, you have to use a lot of stealth. Dead Space 1.
There are very, very few sections where you have to use stealth in the Callisto Protocol. There are like a few runes where there are enemies which are blind that will automatically kill you if they spot you. But even then, it is very, very easy to get through those runes because the other enemies don't react whenever you kill one of them. Like, you can literally just go kill every single enemy in a stealth room and be done with it. It's very, very easy to get through that room or get through those like set of challenges. He's acting like this is like a really big part of the game when it really, really isn't. Same thing with the whole combo. Same thing with the whole like system of melee combat. It's literally just dodge left, dodge right, hit, or dodge right, dodge left, hit, or like dodge left, hit. Whatever the combo is decided by which direction the enemy is attacking. And even then, it doesn't need to be that responsive either. You just have to hold the button when you see which hand they're reaching with, and then he'll just dodge automatically. It's not that difficult. He's acting like it is because he fucking sucked at it.
Has 0 stealth. So that is by far a new and interesting gameplay element that I liked in the Callisto Protocol.
I would like to point out that a lot of survival horror games don't have a whole lot of stealth in them at all either. Like, the Callisto Protocol having stealth is like as a fourth section reminds me a bit more of like Aliens Colonial Marines or like some other alien game like that, where they actually do have some stealth sections involving the aliens. But for the most part, like, most survival horror games don't rely on stealth. Like, it's literally just, you'd have to dodge the monsters and like make sure like, you know, they don't get to you before you either leave the room or you kill them. In most cases, you'd want to make sure that you leave the room first, because trying to like fight them will end up being a drain on your resources, which you might need later on if you need to fight a boss or something like that. But yeah, most survival horror games don't rely on stealth for this very reason. It's kind of boring to do so. And even then, the ones that do it are like less survival horror games and more just like horror, straight up horror games with puzzle elements where you can't fight the monsters at all. Survival horror is specifically about resource management and like exploration. It is not necessarily about puzzle solving, because the puzzles are very, very rudimentary. Something like Amnesia is not a survival horror game. That is just a straight up horror game where your only job is to just like, if a monster sprouts you, you're dead. You can't fight back, which is not really a convention of the genre that I like all that much, but it is something that is there, that like monsters there, you can't fight back. You have to run away from it. What he's talking about like this, like putting that kind of thing into this kind of game is like kind of a jarring thing. It's very much a pace killer, actually, if you think about it like that. The pace, like, you want to have like a consistent pace and a consistent sort of gameplay loop throughout most of the game. That doesn't mean you can't shake things up once in a while with maybe a stealth section, but maybe have it be a stealth optional section as opposed to like a full-on stealth section where you will automatically die if something catches you. I don't know. I know like The Last of Us is like that too, where it's like that game is mostly stealth. That game is mostly stealth, but still, like you can't like just have something like that be forced upon you and then like immediately think players are gonna like that kind of thing or be receptive to it.
Now, are there similarities? Yes, undoubtedly you're going to say I can draw parallels between Dead Space 1 and Callisto Protocol. But once I played through and beat Callisto Protocol, albeit there were a few very frustrating parts, I would say it was a really fun game. Was it difficult? Yes. Callisto Protocol is way more challenging than Dead Space 1. it's just a different animal. You have to actually learn ways to survive when all the odds are against you.
Is he limbing somebody right now? Like, I'm just noticing his right hand leaning over to the keyboard on his laptop to see if he needs to ban somebody. He's either banning or scrolling, one of the two. Either way, like, he's like, yeah, it's a lot harder. It's like, not really, because it's just like it's harder when you're like a mitten mash like fucking Dave here is. Like he just like pretty much just button match throughout most of the games he plays. And if you do that in like Callisto Protocol, yes, it is more difficult because you're not really like doing proper timing to dodge the attacks, which is what this is. Again, it's like fucking Punch Out. I actually don't know if he ever played Punch Out, but still, if he did, he'd probably suck at it. Either way, like it's not that difficult. It's actually really, really easy. At least with Dead Space, the things like present a challenge to you and like will present a drain on your resources as you go forward, especially with ammo and stuff like that. And he's going to get into the differences in a little bit, but I might as well talk about them as well. Comparing Dead Space 1 to Dead Space Remake. Dead Space 1 was very much of an action horror game, much in the same way that Resident Evil 4 is. Like, that's the most easy comparison I can make to. It's like, oh, it's Resident Evil 4, but in space. Like, that's like the best comparison I can think of, because it very much runs the same thing where it's like you have a lot of resources, but you still have to manage what you got, and you have a limited inventory space in order to manage some of the stuff that you've picked up along the way. But for the most part, it is just simple. It is just a simple go from point A to point B. Here is your mission objective. Find a way through it. There's some light puzzle solving in the one area that you're in, and as soon as you're done with this area, go into the next area. Stuff like that. I have a feeling that Dead Space was very much inspired by Resident Evil 4 in terms of its gameplay loop, which is fine because Resident Evil 4 is one of the best games of all time. Meanwhile, Dead Space Remake is much more of an open adventure game, with a lot more to explore and a lot more backtracking, like you would in any other adventure games. Like once you find, you know, the key card, go back and open the door that you saw before, that kind of thing. It's different enough that you could theoretically enjoy both games, even though they had the same plot and for the most part the same storytelling conventions. There's some differences in the fact that Isaac can talk, and there's also some differences in the way that the story is presented, with characterizations and the like, and also how things basically were changed. Because I remember there was a whole bit of like retconning done with how the markers were in Dead Space 1 between 1 and 2. With the red marker in Dead Space 1 and Dead Space Remake, it has a completely different purpose. Still, the remake is still I would say the remake is still worth it just because it is a different kind of game than it is in the original one, where the original was, like I said, just a straight up like survival action game, or like or a horror action game, as opposed to this one, which is like more of an action adventure, and closer I think in thematic thematic conventions and tone to something like Resident Evil 7 or the original Resident Evil, like, which are much more like, oh, you have this open space that you can come back to at any time, but once you're done with the space, you're basically done unless you want to go secret hunting later on. Like, it's like that. Still good though. Still, like I said, still good. It's just a different kind of good.
You can't just rely on the plethora arsenal of weapons that you're going to find in the game. The game doesn't throw a lot of ammo at you. The weapons aren't enough to take down the enemies. You have to be using stealth and melee. So it's
melee, but yeah, still.
Even the plot has similarities. So yeah, you're always going to say, oh, they bit off of it. No, they didn't. They made the original. They have the right to make another game that's similar but different. Callisto Protocol absolutely is different.
I wonder what we'd say about this if he were to play like fucking Bloodstained, but again, he's never going to play an indie game, but it's still an interesting thought. What if he did play Bloodstained?
I just kept challenging myself to get better at it, and I beat it and really enjoyed it. I thought it was an outstanding game. A lot of people disagree with me, and they have the right to do that, but I tried to keep...
They had the right to be wrong, basically. Like, that's what he goes on about. Like, oh, they had the right to have their opinion, but I'm the one with the correct opinion. Like, shut the fuck up. Like, don't do this fence sitting thing. Just actually own your opinion. If you like the game, you like the game. If people didn't, they didn't. And you don't have to disparage other people for disliking the game or try to rationalize why they didn't like the game that you liked. And the only reason you liked the game is because it was pretty much a walking sim. It was a walking sim with very little player input, which is what you like about most of the games that you play. If a game requires any sort of like remotely complicated player input, you kind of want to shelve it immediately.
Callisto Protocol a fair shake, and I really, really loved it. In fact, I think a lot of people kind of sadly panned it because the PC version ran so poorly.
That's a good reason to pan it though. Like if the PC port, if a port of the game is bad, they have a right to complain about the bad port job, because they might not own a console to play it on. They might want to play it on the PC because the PC usually involves some sort of modding tools or modding support, something about it to make the game more customizable. You're in your right to complain about a PC port, Dave.
Dead Space Remake. And let me tell you, if Callisto Protocol played like the Dead Space Remake, I would have felt like I played the same game twice. Thank God it was different. Dead Space Remake. Let's now get to the subject matter.
Let's get into the subject matter. We're 6 minutes and 20 seconds into this video, by the way. Let's get to talking about the thing that I want to talk about for the next 13 minutes. 6 minutes after I rambled on about something completely different. Yeah, real nice transitioning there, buddy. Real nice job of staying on topic.
Essentially Dead Space 1, but there's some differences. The graphics are much improved.
I like how he says it's essentially the same game, but different, as if the differences don't matter all that much. When they totally fucking do. The difference is making an entirely different game. It's like saying Final Fantasy VII Remake is the same game as Final Fantasy VII, the first disc. It's like, no, that's completely wrong. It's so wrong.
Elements have been changed. For example, the Ishimura ship now all links together, almost like you're playing Metroid or Castlevania. Previously, each level was kind of linear, and you would use trams to go from one level to the next, and once you progress to the next area, you couldn't go back. In this game,
I already just summed this up in basically a lot shorter of a time than what he did, but to recap, whatever it is, Dead Space Original is an action game, much like Resident Evil 4, and Dead Space 1 Remake is an adventure game, much like Resident Evil 7, 8, or even Resident Evil 1 or 2 Remake. There, I saved you some time, but he's gonna keep rambling on about the differences as if they fucking matter, because who was this video for? Who are you talking to? Where's the gameplay? Shouldn't you have like a little bit like a gameplay window to show what you're talking about, as opposed to you wildly gesticulating like your fucking Italian blood says you need to do?
Everything links together, and you can go back later on to unlock new areas and get new power-ups in the way. That's kind of a neat new thing.
I understand talking with their hands and talking with their body language, but he just like exaggerates so much. Like, cause like, oh, I'm Italian. Dude, you're fucking Polish.
This is different. In the original Dead Space 1, there were 0G parts. There's 0G parts in the remake, but the 0G parts you freeform float around, similar to how they added in Dead Space 2. You didn't do that in the original Dead Space. In the original Dead Space, you had to have your magnet boots step on certain parts, and then you had to do puzzles or fight bosses there. It was kind of frustrating because it was very limiting. Now being able to freeform move around definitely made it feel like a better experience. And in general, there was one particular boss fight that is so much better. In the original Dead Space, all you do is you aim cannons and fire. It's a completely different thing from the rest of the game. It's like a mini game. In this game, it's epic. You're shooting around, you're aiming with these guns, but you also have to aim your weapon at it. You're dodging, you're using all the abilities you found in the game.
I'll have to watch how he actually received this part, because I don't know if he actually liked it all that much. Knowing him, he probably complained about it in the moment. But thing is, I do know what he's referencing. In the original Dead Space, there was a section that was essentially just a turret boss where you shot asteroids, and then you eventually shot like I think it might have been part of the hive mind. You shot part of the hive mind in addition to shooting down meteorites, using manual aiming on like basically space debris cannon, like what he's talking about. And in this version, the boss fight takes place in a 0G environment where you had to calibrate the cannon so they can automatically fire on the boss without your input, while you're still like dodging its attacks. And it becomes more of like I don't know, don't stand in the fire, hot potato thing, as opposed to what he's like mentioning. It's a big improvement over the original boss, and thematically more in line with Isaac's character to repair the guns as opposed to manually taking them over like a soldier would. And I guess that's like probably one of the better changes that they've had to do in this game compared to the original game, where it's like, oh, this is a good change they made. Still, I had to watch how he received this part, because I doubt he liked it. He likes to talk a lot about things that are like, oh, this is a really cool like section of the game, or this is like a really like unique or whatever. And when you watch his playthrough of it, he fucking hated it. And that's just another thing that I kind of have a problem with him discussing things, because the way that he uses words is it's a small nitpick of mine, but he uses words to the point of meaninglessness. Like, for example, you could make a count of how many times it says epic or unique in any given playthrough or any given video, to the point where they lose meaning. It makes him sound like he's actually like fucking 12. Like, everything is epic, everything is unique. Well, if everything's unique, then none of it is. Same thing with everything. If everything is epic, then none of it is. Like, you have to have like those moments of quiet. You have to have those like moments of calm in order for like a set piece to stand out as being like bombastic or particularly impactful. Like, that's what it is. But he'll like describe everything as epic and everything is unique, and then won't say why or how. He just says it is. I'm like, if you ask him why or how, he's like, well, go watch my playthrough and you'll see. It's like, we don't want to watch your playthrough. We want to hear you explain it. Like, nobody wants to go sit through your, like, you know, hour and a half long video in order to see what you're talking about.
Very neat, and I think that was much better done than in the original game. All right, but in reality, what is the true addition to this game? Cutscenes.
What?
There's supplemental information added to the story about Isaac's family that you didn't know about in the original game. There's also new.
They retcon Isaac a little bit. And what he's talking about is that there was originally a Dead Space animated movie that was sort of like a side tie-in that was like, I guess it would, I've seen the movie. Dead Space The Fall is what it's called. And the movie basically is like the events on the Ishimura leading up to the distress call, which Isaac and the Callum or whatever his ship is called, Isaac and his rescue team going in to see what's going on. It was the lead up to the events of that. So basically, the advent of the Necromorphs, the experiments done by the unitologists on board the Ishimura, all that stuff is covered in Dead Space The Fall, and they incorporated some events from Dead Space The Fall into this remake, which is a neat addition and actually fleshes out some stuff. But they also retconned Isaac a lot and like recontextualize his relationship with Nicole, whereas he and Nicole are not in a good relationship. They're like on the rocks right now, but he still feels bad for basically guilting her into traveling aboard the Ishimura to get her away from him. Is what basically happens, and what kicks off the events of the game in this version of it, where he basically convinced Nicole to join the Ishimura crew because he didn't want her around anymore for a little while, because he blames her for her mother doing a murder suicide on his parents. The biggest change. They retcon his backstory a little bit before going on to the ship, and also make Isaac much more like he's a former unitologist. I'm not sure if that was the case in the original or not, but he was a former unitologist, or he was raised by unitologists.
New video cutscenes that are added that were not part of the original game, that were more text logs, or some cases they didn't exist at all, that are added in the form of side missions. You'll be going through the Ishimura and it'll tell you to go to these optional areas, and you'll get a new cutscene starring Nicole or one of the doctors on the ship that originally was not in the game. And it'll flesh out a lot more of the plot, and you'll get a lot more of an overall plot experience in this remake version than you did in the original.
Or just watch The Fall. The Fall's pretty good. Just watch The Fall. Just watch The Fall. The Fall's good. You don't need these.
And for my viewers, they actually told me that a lot of these new cutscenes were based on the optional anime spin-offs that had been released many, many years ago from Dead Space and were very successful. So it's
why are you leading? We're rocking back and forth on the X and Y axis.
But for the most part, this game is Dead Space 1. The gunplay is pretty much identical to the original Dead Space game from 2008. They didn't really tweak it at all. Excuse me. If anything, the one thing they did tweak was a little bit about the enemies. There's some enemies now that they used to be able to shoot them and they would kind of stagger. Now they just keep moving at you. So basically, you gotta use the stasis a lot more in this game, I feel, than in the original. Because
I'm not sure if this is just him having shit aim and not actually hitting the limbs like he was supposed to, or if the enemies are or if the enemies legit have like more stagger resistance. But then again, I also saw him use the pulse rifle really badly a lot of the time. He basically used it as like an automatic gun as opposed to like a pulse, as a burst fire.
Oh man, that is a very subjective question. I'm someone who's played Dead Space 1.
That is a very subjective question. Then give us your subjective opinion, you asshole.
Again and again and again over the years. Now,
You don't need to preface it by saying, "Oh, that's a subjective question." We know it is. That's why we're here. We're here to listen to your opinion about why it's a good purchase.
That's exactly what it is. It's a facelift. This is not a new game. When you replay Final Fantasy VII in the remake, that's a new game. That's not the original Final Fantasy VII. When you replay Resident Evil 2 remake, that feels like a totally retooled new game. This is not a retooled new game. It is Dead Space 1 only with these minor facelift improvements.
No, it's a completely retooled game. It legitimately is. There's a lot more to it than the game that he like lets on. The fact that it is now an open world adventure changes a lot about how you like interact with the environment of this game, and he just kind of glossed over that. He did say it happened. He just glossed over the fact that this happens. Like, and that's like the biggest part of it, that the game is just much more different than the original. Although the original is still good and you still can play the original, it's cheaper now because this remake exists. But still, it's worth getting this remake if you like the style of the game that it is. Like, if you like the more open plan adventure game as opposed to the linear action game. But they're still good. It's still different enough that you should buy it.
So, is it worth $70? Well, if you've never played the original Dead Space, perhaps yes. If you really want to experience the definitive version of Dead Space 1, play the Dead Space remake, pay $70 for it, get on it now, really enjoy it. But I have a very hard time justifying a full $70 retail purchase for this game when it's exactly the same as the game you've already played. Yes, there's a few new things, but
He's basically complaining about the fact that he had to pay for it at all.
Hoping maybe they would add a new part of the Ishimura, even if it's not even its own standalone chapter. Have it be a part of the game that you go back to a couple of times for some optional things, or maybe a new boss tossed in, a new enemy type. It really feels like you're playing the same game, and that's unfortunate. So I was hoping for more, and I don't feel like I got out of the game what I was really looking forward to.
I honestly had to check this a bit because I had to go back and look at some of the stuff, because I could look at the tips tracker that exists by Piece of Piece. The reason I think he's saying this is because it actually didn't get in as much money as he had hoped it would get him, because to him this is like one of the things that he is known for. So he assumed that more people would be throwing him more money at the game. I do know that like it sort of dried out towards the end, like most of his games do. Like they sort of just kind of like dry out towards the end for any number of reasons. People lose interest in watching him. People lose interest in the game itself. Whatever. Like. He did the same thing with Elden Ring and God of War. Those playthroughs dragged on for way too fucking long, to the point where nobody wanted to see them anymore, or they just like, were tuning out, which, that happens sometimes if you're a creator like him. But he didn't like mostly everybody who had played this game was already done with it and moving on to something else, and it still took him like 3 weeks in order to get the shit done, however long it took. I think it took like maybe 2 weeks, but most people were already done with the game by the time like he was most people were done within like a few days, because they played through it in like a couple of days and then moved on to the next thing like almost immediately, which was like either Forspoken or Hi-Fi Rush. Either way, like I had to check to see exactly how much money he made on the tail end of this playthrough, because typically if he doesn't make a whole lot of money on the game, he thinks it's bad. If he makes a good amount of money on the game, he thinks it's good. Which is why he's playing shitty haste like Oblivion and Modern Warfare Warzone. He doesn't even play any of the other game modes in Modern Warfare anymore, because he just is hoping for people to give him those fucking like those challenges or those missions or bounties or whatever the fuck he decides to call them, in order to gain money from them. That's the only reason why he decides to play that game in the first place, was because people give him he has the potential to basically win big when playing Warzone. And for him, it legitimately is like playing the fucking lottery, because he's so bad at the game. Like he legitimately just camps the entire time. And which just doesn't make for good content. If you're a content creator, you should not be camping like he does when playing something like Warzone. But I guarantee you, he has a good opinion of Warzone when he's doing well at it in terms of like tips that night. And when he's doing poorly at it, he hates the game, which is most of the time. It's most of the time, especially like if it's like he like blames the game for him not getting money that night or whatever. And it's just, no, you just suck at the game. In the case of this, he did suck at Dead Space, but I actually had to wonder how much money he made from it to actually come to this conclusion. Because if he got a lot more money from it, I have a feeling he will be seeing this game in a much more favorable light and saying, yes, this is the definitive version. You should definitely play this, even if you've played the original. And he's been like this with a lot of other things. Like he will say like, I might do a video on his opinions of Hi-Fi Rush, because I know he's not going to review it, but he did do like a little bit of a breakdown of it. And his opinion of Hi-Fi Rush is basically like, oh, I don't really like this game all that much. It reminds me too much of like a PS2 era game, and it's like it's a character action game that has a lot to it. The only reason he's saying that kind of thing is because the first night he played it, it only got him $17. And the second day he played it, he got $170 that day, but that's because he basically asked for people to like fund his business purchase of Hogwarts Legacy and his business purchase of several game day paraphernalia that he's going to use and show off maybe once and then shove in his closet afterwards. And that's kind of not a really good way to run a business, to basically tell people to subsidize your business expenses, because those are your business expenses. You should actually have money put away to purchase things for your business. And even then, after basically after that, he got like $170 that day. And then after that, he got fucking nothing for like the rest of the day when he was playing Hi-Fi Rush. People came to watch and they thought the game was good, but like a few people were like, I think this game is boring. But the problem was that Phil was making it boring by taking way too long to try to get on beat, and his own like sense of rhythm is so fucking bad in that game. It's a spectacle.
Just being honest. Now, if you're going to directly compare the Callisto Protocol to the Dead Space remake and ask what's the better game, okay? Well, if you like a game that's run and gun action and all you care about is basically run and gun, that's Dead Space.
This is because he was playing on normal difficulty, where the game pretty much throws resources at you so you can get through the game in the easiest way possible. Like, far be it from me to shit on people who play games on easier difficulties, but he actually played a game on an easier difficulty, which in this case he did. Most people that I know played the game, like who were veterans of the series, played the game on hard, which he should have done since he's played this game several times before. If it really is just like a carbon copy of the original Dead Space games, he should have had an easier time with the game and therefore played it on hard mode so that he'd get more of like a better experience with it, or done like the quite frankly really fun challenging run of just using the plasma cutter the entire time, which is a run. Like there technically, if you want to complete the game, you do play the game like 3 times or whatever. Once with just the plasma cutter, once with actually maybe twice probably. Once on any difficulty with the plasma cutter, and then once on impossible mode. And then at the same time of your second playthrough, which might be the impossible mode playthrough, gain all 12 of the marker pieces and get to the secret ending, which I'm not sure if that is the achievement, but it still is like a thing you need to do for 100% completion. He should have just played this game on hard mode, and then he would have enjoyed it much more, probably, quote unquote, enjoyed it. His audience would have liked it more that he fucking failed all the time. But hard mode is really the way to play these games if you've had some experience with them before. In most cases, I try to play on normal or hard mode, but that's only depending on like if the game says like, are you new to this kind of game, or like, you know, or are you new to like, are you new to this specific franchise, or if you're new to this kind of game in general, in which case I'll usually pick like normal. If I know a bit about the franchise, I will play on hard. And in this case, most other people that I know of have played the game on hard on their first run of the game. He didn't. He played it on normal, and he likes to justify playing games on normal difficulty as being the intended way to play it, and the people who play it on hard mode like are just doing it as a flex. And it's like, no, that's not the case at all. It's just that most people who play games for a living, even as a hobby, find normal mode to be too easy. Normal mode is usually intended for people who are more casual gamers, and not necessarily like people who play it as their primary hobby or for like some sort of living in that kind of regard. And even then, like very hard or impossible difficulties are usually reserved for like people who are like legitimate challenge runners. They're not like, hard mode is usually good enough for like the hobbyist, which is what Phil likes to claim to be. He's like the hobbyist and the professional all in one. But he plays on normal difficulty, which is why he was being like bombarded with supplies. If he played on hard mode, it'd actually be much closer to the survival horror that he's talking about, with limited resources. But he didn't, and so that's why by the end of the game he just had so much shit in his pockets that nothing was a challenge anymore.
But that's also a 15-year-old game trope where we've kind of outgrown that. I mean, at the time of Dead Space 1, you also had Resident Evil 4, 5, and 6, which everyone got tired of and said, we want to go back to classic survival horror.
That wasn't the case. People just didn't like Resident Evil 6 because Resident Evil 6 was a really, really bad game with really bad controls, a really, really poorly implemented co-op, like co-op mode for everything. And in general, like the story just took a nosedive afterwards. People still, like to this day, like Resident Evil 4. And even then, like Resident Evil 7 and 8 are still very much more actiony than the original Resident Evil 1, 2, and 3. Resident Evil 4 was the start of like more action-based horror games, but even then, there have been a lot more like action horror games since then. Most of them co-op. Most of them have been co-op. I'm trying to think of ones off the top of my head that exist right now. I wouldn't consider Doom or Doom Eternal to be like horror games because they have some horror elements in them, but Dead Space definitely was that, and people were not tired of it because Dead Space 1 and 2 sold very, very well. Dead Space 3 did not, because Dead Space 3 implemented really, really horrid microtransaction systems and also a really, really hackneyed co-op system, which I kind of like had its good moments because the co-op exclusive levels were some of the best content in Dead Space 3. Like the co-op exclusive levels were like the best things about that game. But like it wasn't, that was not the reason why people did not like that. The reason was that it was just really, really poorly implemented. They did not feel good to play. And also they were trying to monetize the hell out of those kinds of games. There were still other good survival horror games coming out at the time, survival action games that were coming out at the time, and just in general action RPG games that were coming out at the time. Like we still had the Souls, we still had the FromSoft games coming out at that time. Like Bloodborne came out much, much later and was still like, you know, still very, very well received, despite the fact that that pretty much is like that kind of game. It really is. It's a horror, like Bloodborne is a horror action game with RPG elements. Like it straight up is. Same with all the other Souls games. Like if you want to like, you know, talk about that with them being like action RPGs or whatever, like they're much more action than they are RPG. Like just because they have like stat builds and allocation stuff like that, they are much more actiony than they are RPG with the way they interact with the world. But you know, he probably knows best about like what games people are developing and how the public receives them. Despite the fact that Dead Space 1 and 2 sold really, really well, Resident Evil 4 has sold well every single time it's been re-released. Resident Evil 5 even sold well. Like there were a lot of games that have sold well in the past 15 years since Dead Space 1 came out that were like what he's talking about and still like did incredibly well. I'd have to go and look at a Steam list of like just games with a horror classification. But there are a lot that just did well, and he's looking at only like the larger AAA things and not looking at like anything else that's a bit smaller.
Dead Space really isn't that. By the end of the game, you got like 7, 8 weapons, you got ammo coming out your butt, you're just unloading giant upgraded arsenals against the denizens of the dead. It doesn't feel like a huge challenge by the end.
Because you're on normal difficulty. Right? You were on a normal difficulty.
Opposite experience. Even if you had all the guns and you had the upgrades for them, by the end of the game, you're still getting your butt handed to you by some of the mini bosses and the like. The final boss.
That's not good design though. That's really not good design because nothing scales. Like, yeah, you want threats to scale to your current place in the game, which is what Dead Space does. There are enemies which are harder as you continue on in Dead Space. Same thing with any other horror game or any other game in particular, like Resident Evil, which he's talking about as well. The enemies scale as you go through the game. Like there are more enemy varieties, enemies like will learn new moves, and there'll be different kinds of enemies, different variants, like the Crimson Heads in the original Resident Evil, like that show up later, and like, and even then with Callisto Protocol, it's like no matter how much you upgrade, you might as well not upgrade anything at all except the baton, because you're still just doing basic melee attacks the entire time. Dodge left, dodge right, attack. That's all you're doing. Again, it's just punch out for 10 hours.
You've got in that game. So, to me, if you want to ask me what game is more classic survival horror, Callisto Protocol is.
No, it isn't. Callisto Protocol and Dead Space both are very much like more action horror based. And the other game that he did play earlier this year, which he's shat on because he got no money for it, was Signalis. And Signalis is classic survival horror. Probably the best example of it in the genre that's come out in a very long time. It's really good. But he will shit on Signalis because it didn't make money.
Challenging survival horror experience. Callisto Protocol is absolutely more challenging. And
No, it isn't. He's just bad. You're just bad. You're just bad at reading patterns. You're just bad. You're bad at fighting games, and Callisto Protocol is basically a fighting game versus the AI. Like, seriously, that's what it was. It was just that. And he's just so bad at it because he's so bad at fighting games. His reaction time is super fucking slow. I don't get it. Like, it's not a good game. Nobody that I've seen talk about this at all, who's completed the game, by the way, thinks it's a good game. It's an okay game that is marred by a really, really monotonous combat system. If you had more variety and more ways to take things down, then maybe it would be fun. Maybe it would be interesting if your guns actually worked for once in that game, but they don't. So what's the point? You just hit things with the stick the entire game. That's all you do. You hit things with stick. I can play other games where you hit things with stick that are much better. Fucking No More Heroes 3, which wasn't that good, is a game where you hit things with stick. And it's much better at a hit thing with stick game than Callisto Protocol. Hi-Fi Rush, which just came out, is probably the best hit thing with stick game I have played in a very long time, and you hate that because you have no sense of rhythm. Oh my god.
Space is a great romping space with sci-fi elements and horror, but a lot of the horror comes from the gore and the story, not necessarily the gameplay. I mean, almost the entire game is just sending these necromorphs at you constantly, all right? It's different in Callisto Protocol. Having to manage and master that melee system.
It's like two dodges in attack. It's literally playing knack. It's just playing knack.
90% of the time, especially when you get big guns at the force gun, you're blowing them back. It's not even a problem anymore. Okay? So for me,
I will say that the one thing I actually didn't touch on involving the Callisto Protocol, which he kind of just reminded me of, he says, oh, you just blow back enemies with the force gun. In Callisto Protocol, you actually could do that as well. If you upgrade your telekinesis thing, which of course this game has that, you can pretty much pick up enemies and throw them into like any number of spike traps or meat grinders that you see as part of the environment, which is what most people that I know who played the game did because they couldn't be bothered to actually do the melee combat system anymore. They got so bored with it that they're just like, I don't want to deal with you, into the grinder you go. And that's how they got through most of the game.
If you were to ask me out of these two games in the modern day, would I rather play Dead Space 1?
I'm covering it up, but I also covering up the super chat stuff.
And which is the better survival horror game? I would honestly answer you. I think Callisto Protocol is. But the thing is, most gamers aren't looking for an ultra challenging experience anymore. They're looking.
DSP, you play games on normal difficulty, aka casual difficulty. You do not play games on a hard or challenging difficulty level. And if you do, you bump it down until you can face tank anything in the game. You are not good at these games. Stop thinking you are. Stop lying to your audience that you're actually good at these games because you play on normal difficulty.
Looking for a more casualized run and gun experience. It's weird how things go full circle, right? We started off with tank control games, ultra challenging, limited ammo, don't know where to go, can't solve the puzzle. That's all part of the survival horror experience. Then the games got so dumbed down during that era when we had Dead Space 1, 2, and 3, Resident Evil 4, 5, and 6. Everyone said, man, those games are too easy and they're just action games now. Change it back to classic survival horror. So we saw that with games like Resident Evil 7 and 8, going back to a more classic formula.
Village was a mix of the two, by the way. Village was a mix of the two. Village was very, very much an action, very, very much like a mix between action and the action style of like 4 through 6, which he's talking about, and the classic house exploration adventure-y type of the original 3 Resident Evils. Even then, most people did not like Village at all because of the action sections in that game, especially in the ones dealing with Chris, and where it just became a third-person shooter, or a first-person shooter, I believe. Yeah, it was a first-person shooter when you had to take down Heisenberg with Chris. It was like, I think people say, like, despite the fact that was much more of a spectacle, that was much more of a low light of the game than a highlight of it. And most people that I know of who liked Resident Evil Village only really remember the first two areas, which is the Lady D's Manor and the dollhouse. Basically, I'm gonna call it the dollhouse, but like it's like the one house with like the baby chase and like the hide and seek with the doll. Like those are the only two things that I know people like really remember about Village. But other than that, like it's not that people like they got dumbed down and we want it back. It's like that's the direction. That's literally just the direction that like Resident Evil went in, and a lot of people saw the success of Resident Evil 4 and decided to make games that were like that. There were still other horror games like that. There's still other games like the classic stuff coming out like that, or games that focus much more on like a sense of dread and like heavy survival aspects coming out, just not in that same genre. I hate to bring up the Souls franchise again, but literally that's what FromSoft was doing the entire time with Dark Souls. Dark Souls is considered an action RPG. It is considered an action game, but it has much more in common with survival horror than anything else, specifically the sense of dread. You never know what's going to come around the corner, and literally everything in that game can kill you. Not just the big boss monsters, but even just the tiny, like the smaller monsters. If you don't take them seriously, they can and will kill you. And that sense of dread, really makes the FromSoft game stand out in terms of being really kind of almost spiritual successors to that specific kind of horror. Even then, it's not that going to the action side of things was a bad idea or a bad thing, because even then there's still things that happen in Resident Evil 7 which are genuinely scary or genuinely unsettling, certain enemy variety, certain enemy runes and stuff like that. It was easier or whatever. It was easier. Resident Evil 4 was definitely easier than probably other games in that sense. It's just more steady progress and you just kind of have to shoot your way through things. There were still encounters which were genuinely tense, and I will say the only horror game I have played was Resident Evil 4. I still remember the Verdugo fight, the fight with the fucking it is called the Verdugo in game, but most people remember it as the alien fight, the fight with Salazar's mutant mutant right hand. And he just sends it after you, and it literally is just you're in a corridor trying to hide from this fucking thing, which is basically just a xenomorph, and you either have to get out of the elevator or take it out. And it is the most intense experience in that game that exists, and that is genuine horror and dread when you fight that thing. Survival horror never went away. It just changed itself around a little bit. And 6 kind of went too far into action territory, even though there were still some horrific elements in 5. And I think most people just wanted 5 to be the end of the Resident Evil series because that's the last time we saw Wesker as well, who was the main antagonist of Resident Evil up to that point. And then we just sort of realized no, there's somebody else behind the scenes, somebody else who had helped Oswald Spencer, and you take them down an 8. And now I don't know where to go with the Resident Evil franchise anymore in terms of story, but that's a different thing entirely. The horror is basically, it always still existed. And even then it sort of flourished in the indie game community. We got that kind of horror that he's talking about with stuff like Amnesia: The Dark Descent. We got that kind of horror with stuff like I hate to mention it, Five Nights at Freddy's. There's a lot of types of horror that we got after the action stuff, but of course, because the AAA scene kind of dropped that kind of horror after a little while, he doesn't care about it because he's a fucking hype beast and he only cares about AAA releases and nothing else. If he does care about an indie, it's because somebody told him about the indie, and it's because he thinks he can make a lot of money from the indie. It's not because he genuinely wants to play an indie game. For the most part, he doesn't, because he thinks that they just don't make a whole lot of money for him. And it's not that, it's the fact that he just doesn't know how to treat them. There are some indie games out there that are just masterpieces, and he just refuses to play them because it's an indie game, it's a low budget thing, it's not going to be that good or whatever. Because he's such a graphic snob and a hype beast that he will only play things with a really big budget behind them, regardless of the fact that those things are of any good quality, and he will pretend that they are, which is what he's doing with the Callisto Protocol.
And now we've got all these reboots coming out, and now you come to realize that even Callisto Protocol comes out, no, too hard, too challenging. I don't want to learn a melee system. I don't want a game that I die in 2-3 hits. No, this is not fair. Give me back my Dead Space.
This is you, though. You legitimately don't want to learn any combat system and get mad when the game doesn't hand you a win automatically just for fucking existing. Like, legitimately, that is you. You rage quit a Kirby game. How pathetic is that? Like, I understand that the final bosses of a Kirby game are intended to be pretty goddamn difficult, but you still rage quit a Kirby game. And all you did for the final boss of said Kirby game was mash. You just mashed the final boss. You didn't actually try to, like, win. You didn't use any strategy at all. The fact that Callisto Protocol lets you mash for the most part on normal difficulty means that you liked it. You did not have to put any effort into learning anything, yet the game made you feel like you did, which is why you probably liked God of War Ragnarok as well. You did not have to put any effort into learning the game because you played on Give Me Balance, which, by the way, is normal difficulty again. And even then, you played on Give Me a Sword to get through some of the hard challenges because you're a little bitch. We know this because the damage ratio was a bit off when you beat those 3-on-1 like berserker fights. You turned the difficulty down without telling anybody, and then during the break, you turned it back up. That's what you did to beat God of War Ragnarok. You did not actually keep the game at a steady difficulty the entire time. You turned it down after you spent 3 hours on a boss fight which you couldn't beat by face tanking. And even then, the game was basically saying, hey, come back to this later. You can't beat it. Come back to it when you can actually face tank it. You're like, no, I'll turn down the difficulty instead. And that is what you did. You did not actually legit go around and play the game as intended in that regard, which you don't do anyway. You just try to face tank everything and hope it works out for the best. And because most of the games you play are on easier difficulty, or they're just easy in general, it often works. That's not skill. Come back to me when you can play Devil May Cry on Dante Must Die mode.
It's hilarious to me that I'm seeing these reviews come out for Dead Space Remake that are like, oh, 9 out of 10, 10 out of 10. Dude, it's the same game from 15 years ago.
And the same game was still good. It made enough changes that it makes the game a fresh experience, and it's still good. Just because the game gets re-released later on down the line does not make it, oh, it's suddenly bad now. It's still good. And the modern conventions, the things that they did to update Dead Space were still good. They were very well received. People really liked the fact that the floor plan was much more open than it was as a linear level, like in the old one. And the old one still holds up too. You can play both of them and enjoy them both for very, very different reasons. I'm big into Monster Hunter, and the thing is, there are some people who really, really like the new world, and some people who still cling to the old world ways. And guess what? Both of them are valid because both of them are very, very distinct style of play with very, very distinct, bundles of content, to the point where you can play something in the new world, which is Rise World, and you can play a game from the old world and still have a completely different yet still perfectly valid experience. You can play Monster Hunter Generations Ultimate, which is the old world way of playing, and play Monster Hunter Rise, which is the new world playing, and still enjoy both, even though basically every single Monster Hunter game is iterative and not innovative, including Monster Hunter Rise. Everything that they have in that game was pretty much taken from Frontier and from World and Iceborne. It is just a combination of everything that Monster Hunter has done to that point. That's what this new Dead Space is. It is a combination, and it is an iteration of the original Dead Space formula, not an innovation. Not every game needs to be innovative in order to be well received or well liked. You can still do something very, very, very well without doing anything new. If you try to be too ambitious, then you end up lacking in some regards. I remember there was one game franchise I was talking about with some friends about this as well, that they decided it was the most innovative, it was the most ambitious installment. I was talking about Persona, the new Persona styles of game, whereas Persona 3 consistently is the best new Persona game that exists out of 3, 4, and 5. It is consistently the best one because it's just close to the old formula of mostly being about dungeon crawling, but it still manages to be a very good visual novel experience in its own right. Whereas with Persona 5, it was a very, very, I would want to say innovative experience. It was innovative, but it was also too ambitious for its own good, and it ended up failing in a lot of things that it had tried to do. Like there are a lot of ways that Persona, like they wanted to advance they wanted to advance the franchise in Persona 5 and Persona 5 Royal, but the ways they ended up doing that made the game really easy in terms of combat and also way too forgiving for the social aspects of it as well. Whereas most visual novels tend to be unforgiving once you've picked a route and like determine who you want to spend your time with. Persona 3 is a better game in both those regards than Persona 5. Persona 5, like, they did way too much and it ended up being like kind of like lackluster and a bit too easy, you know, like the higher difficulty settings. But that's besides the point. The point I'm making is that, like, if you try to innovate, you end up failing you might end up failing in some ways. And in this case, they didn't really innovate, they wanted to iterate. And that's actually what the devs had said in a statement about it. Like, they understood the pedigree that Dead Space had, and they decided that they wanted to innovate on this franchise. Not innovate, they decided to want to iterate on this franchise and stick as close as they could to the original Dead Space that people knew and loved, while still trying to implement some new ideas from other things that they liked at the time. Which is why you have the new the new game being more of an adventure than like a straight up linear action game. And it worked out very well for them. But the thing is, and this is a thing that comes across in a lot of Phil's talks about game development and what he quote unquote looks for in games, is that he is very much like, this thing has to be a completely new experience to me, otherwise it is not a good game. And it doesn't have to be. It never does have to be. You can have a completely iterative experience and still be good. Like Hi-Fi Rush is completely iterative on things like Devil May Cry, on Bayonetta, on God Hand, because that's what Shinji Mikami actually worked on. Like one of his like first projects was God Hand. And it would still be a very good game. It doesn't have to, like, you know, remake. You don't have to reinvent the wheel every time you make something. You could just polish the wheel. You can, like, you know, add treads to the wheel. You can make the wheel more suited for going over rough terrain. At the end of the day, it's still a wheel, but it's just now a slightly better wheel. That's all it is.
Why don't you admit that in the review? It's literally the same game.
They did. They did.
2 hours of new content.
They did.
And you're charging $70.
They did.
I kind of feel bad because that original dev team, that Visceral Games team that went on to make Callisto Protocol, they got really hurt 2 months ago.
Why do you care about what happened to the dev team? And it's also not only them. It's only the one guy.
Justify it. Besides, the graphics sucked on the PC. Really? Now.
It wasn't that the graphics just sucked, it was the fact that the game barely ran on PC and they had to rush out a hotfix in order to make it run properly.
This game comes out, everyone's 9 out of 10, 10 out of 10. You do realize they made this game, right? Callisto Protocol is the evolution of Dead Space. Dead Space Remake is a return back to form of 15 years ago.
Yes, even if it is a return to form, it's iterative, which is fine and why it's better. Callisto Protocol tried something new and it didn't work. And we're hoping that, like, because like a lot of people said like that Callisto Protocol was not bad. Like, it legitimately was a very okay game. It was like the most okay game that came out during that time. The problem was that there was a lot of missed potential for it. And hopefully in the next project, if they do make a sequel to Callisto Protocol, which they probably will, that this next project will be a bit better and that they will have learned more from the failures of the first one in order to make a better game for the sequel. Which is what you can hope for in a sequel. If the Callisto Protocol 2 or whatever it's called comes out and it is a much better game based on the criticism that the first one received, I will say that they have definitely made a really solid attempt at, like, you know, iterating on their franchise, and that it might be a worthy successor to the original Dead Space. The remake Dead Space stuff will more than likely be its own thing that can be compared only to itself and only in differences to the original Dead Space. It is not necessarily like that is an iteration on the original formula, whereas Callisto Protocol is a failed innovation on that formula. If it manages to innovate successfully with Callisto 2, then more power to them. They've successfully managed to make a better game. Good. Because like most people have said, Callisto Protocol is incredibly gorgeous for what it is. It actually looks really, really good. It's just a problem that the gameplay is just not up to snuff in most regards.
Which is fine. But we moved on from that and said that we wanted something different. That's why we don't get run and gun games anymore.
We actually get run and gun games all the time. We get this kind of games all the fucking time. But still, go on.
Now all of a sudden, run and gun games are 9 and 10 out of 10 again. I don't get it.
Yeah, because they're good. Because they're good.
What do people want? I'm confused because for me, I like the classic Dead Spaces, but I know where they came from, and I would like an evolution of that, which is what Callisto Protocol was. But apparently people don't want that. They just want go back to the games we know. So, listen, I guarantee you this game will likely sell a lot.
Why? He's doing a weird gatekeeping thing right now. He's doing a really weird gatekeeping thing.
Hopefully, if they make a Dead Space 3 remake, they change it. Because then the game got so watered down and so run and gun, and there was like no horror at all. It was just an action game, much like Resident Evil 6, okay? And I really hope that if they do make
he's disliking Dead Space 3 for the people that didn't for the wrong reasons, basically.
Dead Space 3, they wrote themselves into a corner they couldn't write themselves out of, which is why the series died after that. I don't want to see that happen again.
That wasn't the reason the series died. The reason the series died is because while Visceral Games had plans to continue with the franchise, they legitimately had plans to continue with Dead Space after the expansion DLC for Dead Space 3. EA was no longer seeing dollar signs in their eyes with regards to the franchise. They basically realized that it was kind of a dead franchise and moved Visceral Games to start working on other projects as opposed to what they wanted to work on, which was probably a Dead Space 4. And they ended up making them work on, I believe it was Battlefield Hardline was the product that sunsetted the studio. After the failure of Battlefield Hardline, Visceral shut down. Visceral was closed down. And that's typically like the EA way of doing things. Basically, it's like let's give the studio. We'll have the studio do like its own thing. We'll monetize the hell out of it. And when people act really poorly to that and don't give us the money that we want, we will then sunset the studio by having them work on a product that is completely out of their wheelhouse and then completely destroy the studio. They did it with a lot of studios as well. They did it with Bullfrog. I remember that too. Like they did it with Bullfrog. They did it with Visceral. There's a lot of studios that EA has basically chewed up and spat out. Somehow BioWare escaped that, despite the fact that they're like Mass Effect Andromeda was also the BioWare sunset project was fucking Anthem. I forgot that Anthem existed for a second. That was their sunset project, and they're still around. They're going to be making another Dragon Age, and I guess another Mass Effect, like a Mass Effect 4 was teased, but still, like it's not. BioWare ain't looking good these days. And for good reason. They're sunsetting that studio. They're definitely going to sunset that studio within the decade. Mark my words on that one. They're gonna trash them eventually. Mostly, I think, because of the terrible sales of Anthem and because of what happened with Andromeda as well. And those are franchises that they actually wanted to work on. They were not franchises that they were basically forced to work on, like Visceral with Hardline.
I'd love to see Dead Space continue on with originality, but I think it's kind of messed up that the original makers of this game made their own game. They tried to innovate, and everyone crapped on them for trying to do something different. And now the remake comes out, and everyone says 10 out of 10, but the game is literally the same game that I played 15 years ago.
This is still a really weird point because he always says he doesn't care about reviews, but in this instance, he cares about reviews just to shit on the reviewers. He only cares about the reviews in order to be a contrarian about the reviews. For the most part, if he actually agrees with reviews, he doesn't care about them. But he always tries to be the one who's like, oh, I'm like, you know, my opinion is the one that's the right one because I disagree with, like, I don't follow the hers. Like, no, you just have a shit opinion. Like, you're free to like a shit game. You really are. But you just have to kind of admit that it's a shit game.
With some minor tweaks. So, you know, you can formulate your own subjective opinions, but my opinion is, if you already played the original Dead Space and you played it recently, you should not be paying $70 for Dead Space Remake. It's the same.
Or you can play both of them and realize that they're very, very different experiences. Like I've said before several times over the course of this video, which is already too long, these are very, very different experiences. They're very, very, very different experiences that will give certain players different things out of them. Some people will like the more linear action side of things, and some people will like the more adventure exploration side of things. It really is what you're looking for. And I highly recommend people to play both. The one thing that I do know that they added in to Dead Space 1 the Dead Space 1 remake, which it might make it worth it, is that if you manage to finish the game on a possible difficulty, which is basically just, it's basically just the same thing as hard mode difficulty, but with Iron Man mode engaged, where you can't die at all, and you only get one, and you only get one save over the course of the entire game, is you get the foam finger afterwards, and that would be fun to play with. Like, the foam finger has always been like kind of like one of the best unlocks in any sort of video game ever, where it's like, oh, you get like the overpowered weapon, but the overpowered weapon is actually just a foam finger where your character says bang, 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 and everything dies. That's fun. Like, that's a good reason to get the remake over the original, because in the original, there was no foam finger.
You're not going to get a different experience. You're going to feel like you played Dead Space again with some quality of life improvements and, yeah, some better graphics, but it's not a new game. Again, unlike Resident Evil 2 Remake or Final Fantasy 7 Remake, it's definitely the same game that you played 15 years ago. That's
Resident Evil 2 Remake actually is the same game that you played that long ago. It's just really weird. It's just like, it's the same game.
Game Pass right now for free. So, in conclusion,
What the? I just noticed his camera's like basically doing a really weird autofocusing because he can't sit still. But yeah, like, I think he just, I talked over, but I think he just said, yeah, Dead Space 1 is on Game Pass right now, which is fine. Or through EA Pass or whatever subscription service that they're using. That you can play like Dead Space 1, the original, which is, yeah, go play that one. And then I guess my opinion of it is that if you like the original one, then you'll probably like the remake too. So go buy the remake if you want to. I have a personal boycott against EA, so I won't. But I will say that it legitimately looks like probably one of the best horror games that's come out in some time. Better than RE8, apparently. Better than RE8 in my opinion. I did not like what RE8 presented. I think Dead Space remake is like a lot better than that. And then on the indie side of things, you also got Signos, but still, I'm going off topic there.
I like the Dead Space remake. I did enjoy some of the improvements. It ain't worth $70 to me. It shouldn't be worth $70 to someone who's already played this game many times. Wait for a price drop, in my opinion. And is Callisto Protocol as good or better? Is Dead Space better? That's a subjective question.
He's fence-sitting here. He wants to say Callisto is better, but he's going to get shit for it, which is why he's not answering it.
If you like more run-and-gun, action-based games, you're going to like Dead Space more. If you want true survival horror, where everything is dangerous, where you're never safe, where you can't amass an arsenal that's going to save your butt, then you want to play Callisto Protocol.
This is him basically portraying the fact that it's not actually a subjective opinion. This is my actual opinion that Callisto is better. Where he says, oh, if you just want to run and gun action game, he's downplaying what Dead Space actually is. And he's trying to upsell what Callisto is as well. By like, if you notice, he spent like maybe 2 seconds describing what Dead Space was, and he's on like 10 to 15 seconds describing what Callisto is to try to sell that game instead, because he wants to sell his contrarian opinion. And I don't understand why he needs to hold on to this for so long. Why he's basically dying on this hill that Callisto is like a better game than Dead Space remake. It isn't. It really isn't.
So what do you want out of your survival horror? Do you want true suspense, danger, or do you want, oh look, by the end I'm Rambo blowing everything away? That's Dead Space.
Yeah, see right there, he's downplaying what Dead Space actually is. And he's like, oh, do you want a real experience or do you want a baby man experience? Like, fuck. Just say your opinion without being such a passive-aggressive dick about it, man.
I mean, he's got a giant foam freaking hand in the game that kills everything with one hit. You know what I'm saying?
Which you're not gonna unlock, and it's a fun Easter egg for people who play the game that much. You're never gonna get that though because you suck. I'd love to see him try an impossible run to try to unlock the foam finger. He's never gonna do it, but I'd like to see how long he lasts.
You can kind of tell what they were going for by the end. So, thank you for watching this video. I hope at least this has cleared up some questions. Maybe now you can make a judgment for yourself and enjoy. No matter what kind of survival horror you like, there's a lot to eat right now. We're eating the survival horror buffet. We've got a lot more survival horror. And
oh my god, he's just so like he's just so disingenuous about this whole bullshit. Like really he is. He really is disingenuous about this whole thing.
Right, enjoy.
Like whatever kind of survival horror you like, this is the right kind of survival horror that you have to like though. Like that's a double bind. That is a legit double bind.
Peace out. See you later.
Okay, so we're done with this video. Let me see what he actually said in the comments before I'm out of here. And we're still gonna leave the circus music on because I like the circus music. Fuck you. All right, so get out of here. All right, let's see. There actually are a fair few comments on here. How many comments are there on there compared to like most of the things? 31 comments, and the video has how many views? 1,600 views. That's actually really good for his channel. That's terrible for literally any other channel if it's size of 202,000 subscribers, but that is good for his channel. Let's take a look and see what some of these comments are from the beginning. Because some of these are like just nothing. I get this feeling EA helped streamers to hate and quit Callisto Protocol. No. It's EA would they keep getting no matter how good the remake is, $70 is just an insane unreasonable price. Ah, God. These are just the yes men in this channel, yeah. Enjoy Dead Space Remake Denuvo Edition. There is no Denuvo on this though, I'm pretty sure. It might be on EA Play, but I don't think there's Denuvo on the game. Dead Space got a good score because it's still a damn good game, even if it is the same. Just because it's the same game with better graphics doesn't mean that it should get a lower score. Callisto Protocol in general isn't really that good of a game. I said by 90% of the people that played it, you're probably one of the very few people who love the game. This YouTuber who has never played the original Dead Space, but after playing only the first few hours of the remakes, he said it blows Callisto Protocol out of the water and he actually enjoyed Callisto. Thanks for not shitting on Callisto Protocol. It's just that people can't accept change. God damn it. People are just so... I disagree that there's a learning curve in Callisto Protocol's melee. So there's nothing to learn once you figure out that as long as you hold left and right, then alternate, then you're literally untouchable by especially against a two-head. I would rather play Dead Space over Callisto. They could have had a great game, but they dropped the ball hard, which is why people found the game disappointing. Yep. Let's see. This is what I actually like doing. I like seeing what people say about what he's talking about. Also, I like how it's like, oh, there's like people like, you know, I don't know why this is really weird because I don't know if he's actually enabled comments on here or if he's like trying to make it look like he doesn't like ban comments immediately because he vets everything that's said here. Like even people like, and most of the stuff is like, most stuff here is just some, like either people saying their opinions, which he's not interacting with. He's like, oh, there's back and forth in the comment section. You don't actually talk to people in your comment section. Let's see. I prefer Dead Space over Callisto. I prefer Dead Space 2008 over Callisto. I like playing more of a short experience so I can run and gun and it gives you options and even adjust difficulty, try different ways, have fun in the game my way. Long experience can be that too, like Elden Ring, No Man's Story, side quests or grind. This goes from A to B and plot options to play your way. This is why I love Resident Evil, Devil May Cry, Final Fantasy, and I love FromSoft. They give you options and play your way time out. Just like remakes that had to choose, go for Resident Evil 4 remakes only because changing the environments and unique boss battles and can be a movie like nature. Plus Dead Space is more of a recent memory. Let's see. Wait for a comparison. God, fuck yo. New Game Plus is added to Callisto Protocol, which should have been day one. Let's see. Yeah, I am with Phil and the small group of people who like Callisto Protocol, and I might even go through it again on New Game Plus, waiting for Resident Evil 4 Remake. This isn't an opinion here. Callisto Protocol was a good game. I don't really understand the fake outrage with Games League, because it was bad. That's why. It legitimately was bad. No games deserve 70. 60 was too much to ask, and the two games are different overall. How about the strengths? Callisto has no strengths. The reason I chose Dead Space is more because it's such a timeless classic. The universe. Let's see. Both games are awesome in their own right here. No, they're not. He didn't forget to mention this. He just chose not to because it helps his narrative that the remake is there it is. That the remake is a one-for-one recreation of the original, despite the fact that it actually makes some insanely clever changes to justify its existence as a standalone experience when the original is available on Xbox through backwards compatibility. Yes. Let's see. Yeah, he failed to neglect certain things because, he doesn't change anything. Wrote about a remake and complained about it being a remake. This place when the Destiny's trigger. Sure, you feel bad. Callisto Protocol, you want to trigger Destiny. It's not really. They put more money into graphics and animation Callisto than focusing on the gameplay and fun factors, which is why it was a disappointment. I think if the game was easy, you could fight more than 2 enemies at once with melee, people will have liked the game more. A lot of people hate how challenging and how much of the game relies on melee and dodging versus using guns. I most thought it was going to be similar because it was a spiritual successor and made by the original Dead Space does. Then it released, and the fact that it was so different turned people off. Love the recap and review of Dead Space. Both Dead Space and Callisto are great. How Dead Space to me is better. Demon Souls, Dark Souls, Bloodborne, Elden Ring, I'll say as much, if not more than Dead Space and Callisto Protocol. If people do not mention, complain about that. They have completely different systems in each one, but I get the point that they're very much iterative instead of innovative. I've already said that. think EA did the right choice by remaking it by going the safe route, because I don't think EA would be able to make a reimagining of it without it being terrible. Similar to what BioWare did with the Mass Effect Legacy Edition. Great job, but they can make a whole new experience game just as good. Andromeda, which is, no, it's terrible. Callisto Protocol is dumb plastic-looking enemies. Dead Space utilizes sounds and atmosphere of the game. This is a new game mode in Callisto Protocol. I like how it's just CP. We keep all the weapons and stuff for the last one. What weapons? You have a baton and that's it. Skill is the man responsible for all the hate and lies about Callisto. Check out his review compared to the actual game on 66, and I can't all the comment in Callisto Protocol and really like it. Let's see. I would comment on that one. I might comment on this one later. I don't understand why Phil doesn't do reviews. He sees a lot of truth and I enjoy listening to his opinions. Let's see. I'm just gonna put that one there. he's not that sort of mostly what it says is a lie by omission or to fit his own narratives, which is in everything that he does actually. Like he like a lot of people like, oh, he lies a lot. He blatantly he leaves out most of what he does. He leaves out the truth, not necessarily like lying a lie, but it's a lie by omission. This remake makes the game great to play in the modern day, or those who never played the original, and great for those who want to play, who really want to experience the game again. Therefore, it's worth from first to person, what they're looking for in general. I would wait for a substantial sale to buy this game. I wait for sales in general, like unless it's something that I'm super excited for. I wait for sales in general, which is like fine. Not playing Dead Space in 2008, playing the original this month. I can honestly say I prefer Dead Space 2008 even more than Callisto. Looking forward to a price drop for Dead Space in 2023. What's the point of being alive if you don't at least try to do something or not? What the fuck is the point of that thing? Finally, someone's speaking the truth. He does not speak the truth for anything. But yeah, that will be it for me for today. I am done with this. I apologize that this video was so fucking long, but I tend to be very long-winded when I had to interrupt him every couple of seconds for how wrong he is. And I'll probably do more stuff regarding him, but maybe shorter. Maybe shorter in scale or shorter in scope. Because I like, as much as I like doing this content, it is it's a bit of a drain listening to him talk all the time. But either way, I will see you all in the next one. Bye, guys.